So we're going to actually move on to steps 8 and 9 here tonight. And I'm going to ask maybe if you've got a big book handy there, Annie. We're going to start by reading page 76, and we're going to go through the 4 paragraphs on page 76. So maybe Annie can start us off, and then
starting midway. Now we need more action.
Yes.
Yeah.
Any alcoholic?
Yeah, Annie?
Now we need more action, without which we find that faith without works is dead. Let's look at steps 8 and 9. We have a list of all persons we have harmed and to whom we are willing to make amends. We made it when we took inventory. We subjected ourselves to a Jurassic self-appraisal. Now we go out to our fellows and repair the damage done in the past. We attempt to sweep away the debris which has accumulated out of our effort to live on self-will and run the show ourselves. If we haven't the will to do this, we ask until it comes. Remember, it was agreed at the beginning we would go to any lengths for victory over alcohol.
And I think that's key phrase there. Just keep in mind, we'd made that commitment. When we wanted to stop drinking, we were desperate enough that we said we would do anything to relieve this obsession. And it served us well.
Keep going.
Sorry. Yes, mine just mine just dropped off the screen. So
probably there are still some misgivings. As we look over the list of business acquaintances and friends we have hurt, we may feel diffident about going to some of them on a spiritual basis. Let us be reassured. To some people, we need not and probably should not emphasize the spiritual feature on our first approach. We might prejudice them. At the moment, we are trying to put our lives in order, but this is not an end in itself. Our real purpose is to fit ourselves to be of maximum service to God and the people about us. It is seldom wise to approach an individual who still smarts from our injustice to him and announce that we have gone religious. In the prize ring, this would be called leading with the chin. Why lay ourselves open to being branded fanatics or religious bores? We may kill any future opportunity to carry a beneficial message, but our man is sure to be impressed with a sincere desire to set right the wrong. He is going to be more interested in a demonstration of goodwill than our talk of spiritual discoveries.
We'll just stop there for a minute. There's a lot of interesting things in that. Basically, we're saying that we're going to identify the people that we've done some sort of harm to and find the willingness to actually correct it. One of the things that came up that I didn't understand when I was first doing the steps is what an amend was. What in my mind I always saw that as apology, but apologizing isn't an amend. It's a part of one, but if you look up the definition of amend, it's to make whole or to correct. To change your ways, mend your ways. It's in the actual outline of the word. And that's a far greater and deeper action than just saying, I'm sorry. And I don't know about anybody else on the meeting here, but I spent a lot of time in my drinking days apologizing for my actions and meaning it. But I would still go out and act the same way, do the same stupid things, act in a way that hurt people without really meaning to, but I just couldn't control it. So I think for me, what started to change was that I started acting differently. Instead of apologizing, when I got into the rooms, I started, even before I actually started working through the steps, I just started to act differently to the people around me. I started, we now call those living amends, but I just started to try to clean up my act, and rather than say I'm sorry, I just started to show by my actions that things were changing. And if you're like me, it wasn't necessarily accepted right away. It took time for people to kind of believe that things would change. But part of it too is to figure out who you need to make amends to. And it talks about in what we're going to read that one of the first people you need to make amends to is yourself. You got to put yourself on that list, because the biggest harm we do is to ourselves. We are harder on ourselves usually than we are on anybody else. And part of that is from, just for me anyway, I really didn't feel like I deserved to be one amongst, or to be as good as the next person, or have that kind of respect. And that's part of what learning through steps 3, 4, 5, really changed, was the understanding that I'm just human and I make mistakes, and that's okay. Here it says it talks about where we've been. We need to do some action. Faith without works is dead. Let's look at steps 8 and 9. It says, made a list of persons we'd harmed and to whom we were willing to make amends. That's the key, is becoming willing to make amends. I had a lot of yeah buts. There were people that I knew I had to make amends to, but they'd harmed me as far as I was concerned. So it was really hard to put them on the list. And we'll get into that as well. It says, we made it when we took our inventory. We subjected ourselves to a drastic self-appraisal. Now we go out to our fellows and repair the damage done in the past. But see, we attempt to sweep away the debris which has accumulated out of the effort to live on self-will and run the show ourselves. And that was me for sure. It was all about what I was going to do and how I was going to make things right, or how I was going to run the show. And it talks about it. It says, if we haven't the will to do this, then we ask until it comes. And that's what we're working on in steps 6 and 7, is aligning ourselves with our higher power and asking for help in getting rid of some of these defects and being able to move forward. So these paragraphs are really summaries of what we've been talking about the last few weeks. And then remember, it was agreed at the beginning we'd go to any lengths for our victory over alcohol. I had to be beaten to submission to actually make that, ask for help, ask for, come to a point of surrender. But now that I've been there, I don't need to set that aside and take my will back and try to run the show again just because I, got my alcohol, my drinking under control. People like to point out that in this program, you look at the 12 steps, alcohol is only mentioned once. That's in the first step. The rest of it's all about coming up with a design for living that keeps the obsession away and helps you find a healthy way to live a sober life that is worth living. Like the desire to drink or use other substances is alleviated when the rest of your life falls into a place where you feel like you don't need it. And for me, it wasn't the outside of my life that had to change. It was my internal thinking. My thinking had to change. My attitude towards life had to change. And I like to say that a lot of things about my life didn't change when I stopped drinking, but my attitude towards life after working through the steps changed dramatically. And that's what's allowed me to stay sober and live a life that I feel like's worth living. And a lot of it is about getting out of my own head, giving back, not being tied up in myself. And part of that was, like I say, a big part of it was changing the way I act. And this is definitely a step where steps 8 and 9, you're identifying who you need to help or who you need to make amends with, and how you're going to do that is where the real change started to happen. Step 5 for me was the real experience with conscious contact with another person, one of the first times I'd done that in a long time. And then step 9 was the next time where that really hit home. I had to get real and vulnerable with people that I had identified as being harmed by me, and talk to them very honestly and openly about what was going on in my life, what had changed, and what I was prepared to do to make that change, to make things right with them. And I didn't know it when I came in here, but that was something I really craved, was conscious contact with other people, having a real relationship with them, getting intimate on a level that I wasn't experienced with or used to. Anyway, on that note, let's say maybe we'll continue. John, would you mind continuing?
Sure.
Picking up that to the end of page 77?
Sure. Okay, John, alcoholic.
Hey, John.
We don't use this as an excuse for shying away from the subject of God. When it will serve any good purpose, we are willing to announce our convictions with tact and common sense. The question of how to approach the man we hated will arise. And maybe he has done us more harm than we have done him. And though we may have acquired a better attitude toward him, we are still not too keen about admitting our faults. Nevertheless, with a person we dislike, we take the bit in our teeth. It is harder to get to an enemy than to a friend, but we find it much more beneficial to us. We go to him in a helpful and forgiving spirit, confessing our former ill feeling and expressing our regret. Under no condition do we criticize such a person or argue. Simply, we tell him that we will never get over drinking until we have done our utmost to straighten out the past. We are there to sweep off our side of the street, realizing that nothing worthwhile can be accomplished until we do so. Never trying to tell him what he should do. His faults are not discussed. We stick to our own. If our manner is calm, frank, and open, we will be gratified with the result.
If you want to go.
Yeah, okay. In 9 cases out of 10, the unexpected happens. Sometimes the man we are calling upon admits his own fault, so feuds of years standing melt away in an hour. Rarely do we fail to make satisfactory progress. Our former enemies sometimes praise what we are doing and wish us well. Occasionally, they will offer assistance. It should not matter, however, if someone does throw us out of his office. We have made our demonstration, done our part. It's water over the dam.
Okay, we'll stop there for a second then. So I think the important part in there is that this is kind of a one-sided affair in our perspective. We're there to clean up our side of the street. And kind of like I said, we're not asking for people to meet us halfway. If they do, that's fantastic. And that's been my experience, is when I open up, if somebody's possibly done some harm to me, or, has had a role in that picture, when I've opened the discussion, they'll open up too. But it wasn't always the case. And, we're there to clean our side of the street, not call out, not be judgmental, not ask for, reciprocation. There was a reading that I wanted to do tonight. I was going to do a little story. What I wanted to also talk about before we go all the way through step 9 is how we come into step 9 sometimes with trepidation, because, like I say, we're worried. Number one, we could feel like the other people have played a role in it, but also just afraid, bringing our fears into step 9. Like, what if they don't like me? What if they don't, what if they want to retaliate? What if the response isn't the way I like? And I don't know if anybody has ever read A New Pair of Glasses. It's a book by Chuck C. He's an old timer. But there was a story in it that really resonated me when I I got it when I was new in sobriety, and I'm just going to read it's just a couple of pages here, but it's a really interesting story about our perspective. And this one, I'll just start it off where it makes most sense here. It says, then we have 2 more steps in the first 10, 2 of the greatest ones left. The most immediately effective steps in the whole program are 8 and 9. We made a list of all persons we had harmed and became willing to make amends to them all. Made direct amends to such people wherever possible, except when to do so would injure them or others. If you haven't done that, do it. Do it quick. The weight of the world is removed from your shoulders when you honestly take care of 8 and 9. And that was my experience when I went through them. I'm going to tell you this little story, and it won't take long. Many of you have heard it, but it curls my hair yet. You can tell this was written a while ago. I think it was written originally in the 80s, but relates back to the 50s. About 10 years ago, I got a call on Friday night from a guy in Whittier, and he said, Chuck, I'm sitting here with a 6-gun in my lap, and I'm going to blow my brains out. But Jim says, don't shoot yourself until you talk to Chuck C. And he gave me your number, and I called, and I'm ready to talk. So what have you got to say? And I said, you called on a bad night. I'm talking tonight, tomorrow night, Sunday night, but on Monday nights, open. So if you want to see me, come down on Monday night. But if you don't, blow your brains out. That's exactly what I told him. And at 7:30 Monday evening, the doorbell rang, and in came my boy. Now, let me tell you a little story within a story. Jim was Jim W., who was Sybil's husband for many years. Sybil was 14 years in our central office, and Jim was a compulsive gambler. And he started Gamblers Anonymous and wrote their book. He'd already done that, and then he became an alcoholic, and he called me one time and said, come and get me. And I said, where are you? He said he was in his office on Pico, and I went and I got him, and he got sober. Now, Jim is losing his eyesight, and he's a sick man, but he's sober, and I talked with him on the phone just the other day, and he's pretty happy. Anyway, Jim had told this guy he not only was an alcoholic, but he was a compulsive gambler. And Jim had told him to talk to me before he blew his brains out. Well, here he was, and we started talking. At 2:30 in the morning, we were right where we are now, at steps 8 and 9. And I was telling this monkey, now here's what you got to do. You lost a lot of money that you didn't have, and he had lost it to professional gamblers. And that ain't a very healthy situation if you don't do much for longevity. So here he sits, and I'm saying, now listen, here's what you got to do. You got to go to these people and say, look, I'm not the big shot I would have you believe. I'm an alcoholic, and I found a way to live that might let me live one day at a time without a drink for the rest of my life. And one of its conditions is that we've got to go make amends, and that's why I'm here. Now I admit that the debt I owe you, now I admit the debt. I owe you the money, and I'll pay you as soon as I can. But I ain't got no money now. Why? He said, Chuck, I can't do that. They'll kill me. And I said, so what? You won't have suicide on your mind. And the old boy started to laugh, and he's still laughing. And he's walking the streets, a free man. He was laughing right over the hill, and ever since he left me. And he never quit. He paid them off. Nobody killed him. It's a wonder, these things. So if you haven't done steps 8 and 9, do them. The weight of the world goes right off your back when you do them. And I love that idea. I don't know if you get it, but you come in here and you're feeling like your life is shambles. Like in this case, the guy was ready to commit suicide. He's shown a way out, but he's still like, well, I can't tell them I'm going to go talk to them. They might kill me. It's like, well, what have you got to lose? You're already in that state, and when I got here, I was at that state. I wasn't necessarily on the verge of suicide, but, I couldn't see a way out of the life that I had. And, what this says is just take the next right step. Take a step forward. What have you got to lose? And I love that idea. Like if you give it a shot, you can leave it behind. You don't have to carry that burden around. We managed to get rid of some of our burden when we did step 5. This is the next step where you get to, make things right, clean up your past. And anyway, I don't know if that came across very well, but that story really meant a lot to me. So I'm just going to put it out there. John, you want to pick it up and we'll...
Yeah, sure. John,
I thought Lisa had her hand up.
Oh, sorry. Sorry, I couldn't see it on the screen.
I just wanted to thank you for reading that story, Lisa Alcoholic. One of my greatest fears is the financial amends. They're overwhelming, and just the thought of them overwhelms the crap out of me. So I'm glad you read that story, because I know God performs miracles, higher power performs miracles, and it sounded like the willingness to approach whatever it is going to help bring about a solution that my mind can't even imagine. Yeah. If you know what I mean, from the ego part, because that is one of my big fears. My life is in shambles.
Well, I know a number of people that have come into this program with huge monumental debts hanging over them, and have managed to, by just being honest and open with the people that they have to approach, they've managed to resolve the situations, clean it up.
Yeah,
I know people that have spent like 20 years, making small payments, but have made, paid amazing amounts back over time, but they've done it in a way that they've managed to still be able to live their lives. And
thanks. I don't know a huge amount. It's just the whole concept of going up to people that I harmed, also the usual fear of just having to face certain people, admit certain things that happened that you weren't honest about, all that stuff. So I appreciate that. I've heard of that book, Chuck C. A New Pair of Glasses. Thanks for reading from that.
Yeah. And that's the key thing is, we can either live with our fear or we can do something about it. And that's an example of doing something about it. And usually we find out that there's a way out of our fears.
Just a note on that. There are, there's Stans and Associates and Boland Wood who are they'll help you with if you're in financial distress with counseling around your money, and then also they will contact your creditors, and then you basically have a schedule set up that restructuring your debt, and generally they bring that debt way down in terms of the actual amount you have to pay, but as long as you keep making your payments and there's a process that you follow, so that is one way you can handle the financial stress. If that's concerning you, there are resources out there, and I think some of that they provide, you can go for a session, and I think the first one's free and when you talk to them, but if you sign up, then there is a fee you pay to them, but it all comes through. But they can tell you more about that specifically, but I know I used that.
Thanks.
Before entering this program, I did that and was able to sort of relinquish some debt, but still had to pay some creditors back over a period of, I think it was a year or two, maybe even 2 years. I can't remember exactly, but anyway, I will now commence reading from page 78 of the big book. Most alcoholics owe money. We do not dodge our creditors. Tell them what we are trying to do. We make no bones about our drinking. They usually know it anyway, whether we think so or not. Nor are we afraid of disclosing our alcoholism on the theory it may cause financial harm. Approached in this way, the most ruthless creditor will sometimes surprise us. Arranging the best deal we can, we let these people know we are sorry. Our drinking has made us slow to pay. We must lose our fear of creditors, no matter how far we have to go, for we are liable to drink if we are afraid to face them. Perhaps we have committed a criminal offense, which might land us in jail if we're known to the authorities. We may be short in our accounts and unable to make good. We have already admitted this in confidence to another person, but we are sure we would be imprisoned or lose our job if it were known. Maybe it's only a petty offense, such as padding the expense account. Most of us have done that sort of thing. Maybe we are divorced and have remarried, but haven't kept up the alimony to number one. She is indignant about it and has a warrant out for arrest. That's a common form of trouble, too. Although these reparations take innumerable forms, there are some general principles which we find guiding. Reminding ourselves that we have decided to go to any length to find a spiritual experience. We ask that we be given strength and direction to do the right thing, no matter what the personal consequences may be. We may lose our position or reputation or face jail, but we are willing. We have to be. We must not shrink at anything.
Just a quick note on that. What I would say is, it says here, reminding ourselves that we have decided to go any lengths to find a spiritual experience. We ask to be given strength and direction to do the right thing, no matter what the personal consequences may be. But it's just a reminder that we don't go into this alone. We ask our higher power to come along with us and be with us when we take these actions. We're not sitting in a room all on ourselves. So asking for help, asking for guidance as we start our amends is a big part of it. When we talked about the other day, after I did my step 5, I never felt alone in an empty room anymore. I always felt like my higher power was with me. And, when I did my amends, that was definitely, no matter how much fear I carried into the amends, I asked my higher power for help and guidance, and never felt like I had to attack it alone. So just put that out there.
Okay.
I was going to say, there's somebody, maybe Amy, would you mind maybe selecting a couple of people to keep reading a little bit?
I'll read. I'm Laura. I'm an alcoholic addict.
Okay, Laura.
Usually, however, other people are involved. Therefore, we are not to be the hasty and foolish martyr who would needlessly sacrifice others to save himself from the alcoholic pit. A man we know had remarried. Because of resentment and drinking, he had not paid alimony to his first wife. She was furious. She went to court and got... Did we already read this? No. She went to court and got an order for his arrest. He had commenced our way of life, had secured a position, and was getting his head above water. It would have been impressive heroics if he had walked up to the judge and said, "Here I am." We thought he ought to be willing to do that if necessary, but if he were in jail, he could provide nothing for either family. We suggested he write his first wife, admitting his faults and asking forgiveness. He did, and also sent a small amount of money. He told her what he would try to do in the future. He said he was perfectly willing to go to jail if she insisted. Of course she did not, and the whole situation has long since been adjusted. Before taking drastic action, which might implicate other people, we secure their consent. If we have obtained permission, have consulted with others, asked God to help, and the drastic step is indicated, we must not shrink. This brings to mind a story about one of our friends. While drinking, he accepted a sum of money from a bitterly hated business rival, giving him no receipt for it. He subsequently denied having received the money and used the incident as a basis for discrediting the man. He thus used his own wrongdoing as a means of destroying the reputation of another. In fact, his rival was ruined. He felt that he had done a wrong he could not possibly make right. If he opened that old affair, he was afraid it would destroy the reputation of his partner, disgrace his family, and take away his means of livelihood. What right had he to involve those dependent upon him? How could he possibly make a public statement exonerating his rival? After consulting with his wife and partner, he came to the conclusion that it was better to make those risks than to stand before his Creator guilty of such ruinous slander. He saw that he had to place the outcome in God's hands, and he would soon start drinking again, and all would be lost anyhow. He attended church for the first time in many years. After the sermon, he quietly got up and made an explanation. His action met widespread approval, and today he is one of the most trusted citizens of his town. This all happened years ago. The chances are that we have domestic troubles. Perhaps we are mixed up with women in a fashion we wouldn't care to have advertised. We doubt if, in this respect, alcoholics are fundamentally much worse than other people. But drinking does complicate sex relations in the home. After a few years with an alcoholic, a wife gets worn out, resentful, and uncommunicative. How could she be anything else? The husband begins to feel lonely, sorry for himself. He commences to look around in the nightclubs, or their equivalent, for something besides liquor. Perhaps he is having a secret and illicit affair with the girl who understands. In fairness, we must say that she may understand, but what are we going to do about a little thing like that? A man so involved often feels very remorseful at times, especially if he is married to a loyal and courageous girl who has literally gone through hell for him. Whatever the situation, we usually have to do something about it. If we are not sure a wife does not know, should we tell her? Not always, we think. If she knows in a general way that we have been wild, should we tell her in detail? Undoubtedly, we should admit our fault. She may insist on knowing all the particulars. She will want to know who the woman is and where she is. We feel we ought to say to her that we have no right to involve another person. We are sorry for what we have done, and God willing, it shall not be repeated. More than that, we cannot do. We have no right to go further. Though there may be justifiable exceptions, and though we wish to lay down no rule of any sort, we have often found this the best course to take. Pass.
Thanks, Laura.
Laura?
I can read. Should I start?
Sure.
Yeah,
Sorry, Bob.
Our design for living is not a one-way street. It is good for the wife as for the husband. If we can forget, so can she. It is better, however, that one does not needlessly name a person upon whom she can vent jealousy. Perhaps there are some cases where the utmost frankness is demanded. No outsider can appraise such an intimate situation. It may be that both will decide that the good sense and loving kindness is to let bygones be bygones. Each might pray about it, having the other one's happiness uppermost in mind. Keep it always in sight that we are dealing with that most terrible emotion, jealousy. Good generalship may decide that the problem be attacked on the flank rather than risk face-to-face combat. If we have no such complication, there's plenty we should do at home. Sometimes we hear an alcoholic say that the only thing he needs to do is to keep sober. Certainly he must keep sober, for there will be no home if he doesn't. But if he is yet a long way from making good to the wife or parents for whom years he so shockingly treated, passing all understanding is the patience mothers and wives have had with alcoholics. Had this not been so, many of us would have no homes today, would perhaps be dead. The alcoholic is like a tornado roaring his way through the lives of others. Hearts are broken, sweet relationships are dead, affections have been uprooted, Selfish and inconsiderate habits have kept the home in turmoil. We feel a man is unthinking when he says sobriety is enough. He is like the farmer who came out of the cyclone cellar to find his home ruined. To his wife he remarked, "Don't see the other thing. Oh, don't see anything the matter here, Ma. Ain't it grand the wind stopped blowin'?" Yes, there's a long period of reconstruction ahead. We must take the lead. A remorseful mumbling, "We're sorry," that won't fill the bill at all. We ought to sit down with the family and frankly analyze the past we now see it. Being very careful not to criticize them. Their defects may be glaring, but the chances are their own actions are partly responsible. So we clean house with the family, asking each morning in meditation that our Creator show us the way of patience, tolerance, kindness, and love. Anybody else want to go?
I can go, or do you want to discuss any of that?
Gary Alcoholic. What I was going to say is that the next paragraph is kind of sums it all up. The spiritual life is not a theory. We have to live it. Yeah. Unless one's family expresses a desire to live upon spiritual principles, we think we ought not to urge them. We should not talk incessantly to them about their spiritual matters. They will change in time. Our behavior will convince them more than our words. We must remember that 10 or 20 years of drunkenness would make a skeptic out of anyone. And I just wanted to comment on that because that was one of the things that I discovered or experienced. Like when I sobered up, when I started to work through the steps, started to make amends. A lot of them were at the beginning were living amends. I just changed the way I behaved. I changed the way I acted. I started to, behave differently at home and stopped apologizing and just acted better. And one of the things that I was doing though was I was going to meetings, as many meetings as I could. I had meetings pretty well every night that we had them. I was going to the gym on the other nights. Because when I hit my bottom, my wife was ready to leave. She was ready to leave with the kids. Everything was about to be taken away. So I was being tolerated for the first number of months at home. And the reason I was still there is I was afraid that if I left, if I was kicked out or if I left the home, I wouldn't be allowed back in. I'd never get back in. So I kind of stuck it out. Does anybody else hear that buzzing?
Yeah.
Other than, I'm not sure.
Yeah, I hear. It's not like it's very faint. It's not that bad.
Okay. Michelle here. If you mute, just see if it stops.
There we go.
Sorry, Michelle. Something going on your end.
It's me? There's
Yeah.
no buzzing in my house. The only buzzing is just like the computer noise, like the.
Yeah, I'm not sure where it's just something that
Yeah.
we picked up on our end, but that's
On our
okay.
Oh, weird.
Yeah. Anyways, as I was saying, I was, I was afraid to get kicked out because I figured I would never be able to come home again. And I started to act differently, but my wife was fairly, non-committal, didn't really understand that things were different this time, for the first little while. Because why would she? She had 20 years of experience with my drinking and a lot of apologies. And nothing ever changed. So it took a while for things to start to actually become evident that something different was going on. And like I said, I was going to meetings all the time. I was going to the gym. I was changing the way I was acting. And I started working through my first step group. And just like we are today, I was learning a lot. I was coming up with new concepts, new ways of acting, new understanding of relationships and behavior. And after a time, my wife and daughters started to call me the nag. And I didn't get it at first. And then they finally explained, and they said, NAG stands for New Age Guy. I came in with this whole set of behavior and language that, they weren't part of. It took time. I wasn't forcing a spiritual way of life on them, but they were seeing it around me, and they liked what they saw, but I was on a learning curve that was going straight up because I was applying myself every day and learning something new every day, through the meetings and working the steps. And they weren't on that same glide path. So, it took them time to kind of catch up, but, didn't really matter because it was all good. They started to see that, I was sincere in what I was doing and that things really were starting to change. But, it took time for them to kind of follow along. It took patience and tolerance, understanding on their part too, to be able to deal with the new me. Gary 2.0 as it was starting to emerge. So it's not something I could force on my family. They had to come along at their own pace, and that's really important to remember. Is this is our journey. We spent a lot of years causing chaos and being the tornado in people's lives, so we can't expect them to just change overnight. They have to. We have to build up some trust and confidence in what we're doing before, they follow along. And making amends is definitely one of those things where you get the opportunity to, explain what's going on and give them an opportunity to follow, and to understand what the process is and what we're trying to accomplish. One of the best things I ever got to do was sit down with my 3 daughters and make amends. We talked a little while ago about harms, like harm done. One of the things that I hadn't really appreciated until I went through the steps and I sat down with a sponsor and talked through the different types of harms was one of my biggest harms was not being there, not showing up, not, part of my solution in my drinking days was if I isolated and stayed away from, kept my distance from them when I was drinking, I wasn't causing any harm. But, the not being there was part of the harm. My absence was harmful in itself. And it wasn't that I wasn't, physically in the house. I just wasn't engaging with them because I didn't want it to become obvious that I was drinking or that I was drunk. So, when I understood that just being a dad and coming home, throwing a paycheck on the table wasn't enough, that there was more to relationships than that, that's when it started to change. I got to really work on developing intimate relationships with my 3 daughters, that weren't there before. And one of the beautiful things about that is, like my oldest daughter was 15 when I started my sobriety journey. And my youngest was about 11, I guess, at the time. But they've now had over 20 years of seeing me in sobriety and being there active in their lives. But I was able to explain to them at the time that there is a solution, like there's other ways to deal with stress and cope with problems in life. They saw me learn those things and bring them into the house, and none of them have developed drinking habits, and they know that they can talk to me if they find that they're struggling. And they all went away to university, and while they were away pretty well every day, they would reach out and just talk to me, give me a call or text and stay in touch, and that was not the way it was going in my drinking days. And, what more of a reward could you ask for, for doing this work than to have relationships, rekindle and develop in this program. So, I didn't mean to ramble on about, but that's what the amends are about, is to fix what's broken and to straighten out, the wreckage of the past. For me, that was not being there for my kids, and I got the opportunity to change that. And if that's the only thing that I got out of this program, it was a pretty amazing return.
Hey, Gary.
Yep.
Gary, Least Alcoholic. Are we going over the other book tonight as well?
We're going to go
Red
over the
book?
first part of step 8, but yeah, we're going to run out of time on that. So
Homework.
yeah, it'll be maybe before we get towards the end of this, we could have a quick talk about homework for this week. And I know, Amy, when I sent that outline, it's got the homework listed at the bottom. So maybe you can post that the next day or two on the website for homework. But homework for this week would be the Big Book, Chapter 6, what we've just read through tonight, part of it. The step 8 and 9 in the 12 by 12. And the Little Red Book, there's a chapter on steps 8 and 9. So that would be part of the reading. And then if you're still working on your step 5, trying to get that in over the next week would definitely be on the list. And then making your amends list would be the biggest part of the homework. Make your amends list and also work on becoming entirely ready to tackle it. One of the things that, actually maybe we'll just summarize it a bit here as far as what it talks about in the making your list is, just find it here. I'll pop back to the Little Red Book on my glasses. It talks about 4 different groups of people to try to make amends with. The first one is friends. The next one is families. And then it talks about predators, so we've covered off on that. And then one of the groups is deceased. So how to deal with the people that you can't reach out to and make amends to directly because, the window is gone on that one. But there are ways to deal with it, clean up your side of the street, and those are important. When it comes to making amends and putting your list together is the first step. And then it talks about also, there's 3 different types of lists. It's the ones that I can do immediately because the people are here. The ones where, I'm willing to make amends, but they're not available right now. And then if you're anything like me, there's a few people you put on the list and like, well, I've caused harm there, but they caused more harm to me. And I'm not willing to make amends. There's yeah buts. When I worked through this with my sponsor, he was all about the yeah buts. He said, you're not ready to make your amend if you respond in any way, shape, or form. Yeah, but what about what she did to me, what he did to me? You're not ready. So that's where working on the willingness comes from, is to start to look at it and say, hey, I'm only here to clean up my side of the street. We all talks about in the book earlier, everybody is sick to some extent. We just happen to be worse than others in our drinking, but everybody has their own issues. So all we're here to do is clean up our side of the street, worry about what we've done. And as it talks about, in some cases, that means that we'll, they might meet us halfway and we might be really surprised, but that's not a given. That's a pleasant surprise when it happens, but we have to be prepared just to clean up our side of the street.
Lisa Alcoholic, is it okay if I read the last little bit of the Big Book? Because I think this is really cool, and then it goes into the promises. But before the meeting's over,
go for it. No.
Okay,
I'm sorry. I've got way off time here.
that's
We
okay.
can
My
come
name is
back and clean it all
Lisa,
up next week.
alcoholic.
Yep.
Okay. So the spiritual life, you read that part. They will change in time. 20 years of drunkenness would make a skeptic out of anyone. There may be some wrongs we can never fully right. We don't worry about them if we can honestly say to ourselves that we would right them if we could. Some people cannot be seen. We send them an honest letter. And there may be a valid reason for postponement in some cases, but we don't delay if it can be avoided. We should be sensible, tactful, considerate, and humble, without being servile or scraping. As God's people, we stand on our feet. We don't crawl before anyone. If we're painstaking about this phase of our development, we will be amazed before we are halfway through. We're going to know a new freedom and a new happiness. We will not regret the past nor wish to shut the door on it. We will comprehend the word serenity and we will know peace. No matter how far down the scale we've gone. Oops, sorry, I just lost.
Yep. You got it.
No matter how far down the scale we have gone, we will see how our experience can benefit others. That feeling of uselessness and self-pity will disappear. We will lose interest in selfish things and gain interest in our fellows. Self-seeking will slip away. Our whole attitude and outlook upon life will change. Fear of people and of economic insecurity will leave us. We will intuitively know how to handle situations which used to baffle us. We will suddenly realize that God is doing for us what we could not do for ourselves. Are these extravagant promises?
We think no.
They're being fulfilled among us, sometimes quickly, sometimes slowly. They will always materialize if we work for them. Thank you.
Work.
Thank Lisa. Yeah, that was something I wanted to bring up for sure. I remember the first time I read through the promises, or we read through the promises in our meeting. It seemed like this amazing, unattainable list. But it was like a wish list. Like, wow, wouldn't that be cool? And then as I started actually doing the work, like working through the steps, it became a checklist. I started to get to a point where I could start to check all of those promises off one by one, saying, oh yeah, this is actually coming true in my life. And then, over the years, it's just become a way of life. It's not even a checklist anymore. It's just these promises have happened. Like, they don't all stay in good stead all the way through, but if I work on them, they all, keep reemerging in my life. And one of the things that was kind of pointed out, and there's a few stories around that I really like, but it talks about like economic insecurity. It doesn't say your economic insecurity will leave you. It says the fear will leave you. Chances are that with time, the economic insecurity may disappear as well. But it's the fear that we have around these things that leaves. We learn to have trust in our higher power that things will get better when we, take time and let our higher power run the show. And I love that idea. The feeling of uselessness and self-pity will disappear. Like, we'll lose interest in selfish things. That's what this program does. Get us out of our own head, get us, back into society and community, and feeling like we want to be engaged with the world around us. Like, we like to read these promises. We don't do it as much these days as we used to, but we used to read them pretty well every night, just as a real positive way to end a meeting. It's like, for a newcomer to kind of hear that these things are possible is pretty amazing. Then for the people that have been around for a while and have worked the steps, it's just a reaffirmation that things are great, that life is good. Laura?
I have a question.
Yeah.
Kind of a side question. Have any of you in your travels of the AA worlds met anyone who's super depressed and then they just worked on the steps and worked on themselves and they got out of their depression? Is that even possible, or is that just they're just depressed and they're stuck that way?
I get less
think it
depressed when I have
depends.
steps.
Yeah, I would say definitely same for me. I mean, it's definitely a way to, because it gets you out of thinking about yourself and thinking about others, and especially steps 8 and 9 where you're looking at the harms you've done and and then and actually when you actually do them, that weight that you were lugging around for years is gone. Or at least it was for me. I found it was completely removed. And then, there are some that are still there, but it's because, you know, people are no longer alive or around, but there's ways to handle those as well. And that's where talking with your sponsor about how to do that effectively. And my sponsor told me, write it out and then burn it. Or, if you have a shredder, shred it. Whatever works best for you.
Yeah. One of the other things that I found by working through the steps, I learned how to do things in steps. Not just these steps, but other tasks in my life. One of the things that I always used to find overwhelming is the idea of trying. I liked instant gratification. Like the idea of working towards something was daunting, but working through the steps taught me how to take things and just break them down into small chunks and just chip away at them until whatever task was in front of me was completed. And when you take that kind of an attitude, it changes the way you think. It helps you put depression aside. One of the other things I've heard in here, we talked about the other night, is that if I'm hanging out in my head, I'm hanging out in a low rent district. If I get out of my own head, and think about others and try to do something nice for other people, it helps me. The other thing I've heard, if you want to build self-esteem, do esteemable acts.
Mm-hmm.
Just get out of your own head, and life starts to seem better.
That's what I thought. Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you.
I just wanted to add something, Laura, Lisa Alcoholic. I've been around in and out for a couple decades, and I have found that when alcohol comes out of your system and you're doing the steps, it does, and you're connecting and praying and hugging people and doing all the steps. Yeah, you get a relief of an organic depression, but there are people, such as myself, that are dual diagnosis. So they need to get outside help, and we have a pamphlet
Yeah.
on how to sponsor people with dual diagnosis and also how to medication and outside help. And I think that's really important.
Yeah. Part of this too. Yeah. If you're working through these steps, if you're starting to see progress on it and you're still struggling, then it might help identify the fact that you're suffering from clinical depression, and like you say, there's resources and outside things that you can do for that.
Mm-hmm.
But if it's masked in the middle of your drinking, and the depression that brings on, it's very hard to sort out. So, you take one layer off and then you can work on the next.
I was going to mention one more thing about the economic insecurity thing is if you were like me, I spent all my money at the bar. And so when we stopped drinking, it's amazing actually how much money you have. So by not spending money in that area, you're able to then use it to pay off your debts, or also then build for something in the future that you want and are able to actually accomplish. So that's it.
Laura, do you have any questions about getting out of clinical depression and stuff like that? Because that's a big part of my story. We can text later and I can kind of explain to you kind of the steps I took and stuff like that.
Okay. It's not for me, it's for someone else, but I would love to hear about that.
Okay.
Thank you.
Yeah. So we are running out of time for tonight. And yes, I'm sorry, we've kind of gone all over the map a bit tonight. Good news is that Jill should be back next week. Make it a little easier. We can, I think had a hard time not being able to tag team with her. So We should be a little bit more focused and oriented next week.
You
But
did
I
great,
appreciate-
Gary.
Well, I feel like I'm all over the map, and spend too much time talking about for myself rather than getting you guys talking about what's going on with you. So hopefully next week we will
Next
find that a bit smoother. And like I say, Jill's going to post the homework. Key thing is, like I say, to start working on your list for next week and working on some of the willingness to actually tackle people, even if you, at the moment, don't think that they deserve it. Just remember, if there's a yeah, but it means you've still got some work to do on that person and the way you would tackle the step 9. But all we're asking at this point is that look at the step 8 part of it, make the list, identify the harms that they, that you've done to them, and then we'll work forward on that next week. So hopefully that works for people. And yeah, we'll look forward to seeing you next week.